faith journey began somehow, some way, long before I had language, concepts, or any framework to reference. As has become not uncommon for people my age or younger, I was raised unchurched. I mean that in the way that we only went to church on Christmas Eve and sometimes on Easter, sometimes even going to different churches, and in a secular household turned households. None of my parents talk about their own faiths, so much so that I still cannot tell you a thing about their theologies, and so I was left to find my own way. I'm sure I didn't listen when we did go to church. I'm not a good listener that way. I can listen to individuals and groups when there's conversation, but when listening requires that much of a passive role, one of simply receiving, my mind wanders easily. That's the primary reason that when I'm in meetings that I am often cross-stitching. It is indeed true. It helps keep me focused and it helps me listen better than I would if my hands weren't occupied. I'm not sure that even if I had been a good listener, that it would have swayed me any. The only things that I heard from Christians at school, for example, were beliefs about people going to hell, an idea that I just couldn't understand. The things we hear from the conservative and evangelical groups, who we may also think of as just the loudest of the bunch. I'm sure others had different beliefs, but I didn't hear about them. And I don't know how much I would have cared, in all honesty. As a child, religious beliefs just didn't resonate for me. It provided no meaning or comfort for me. And still, throughout my primary education, I was exposed to religions and beliefs and found them to be fascinating. But fascinating in a, that's so interesting that people believe those things kind of way. Not one of judgment, simply detached fascination. For school, we did tours of different houses of worship across the city at different times and learned about religions and philosophies as we studied different parts of the world. About childhood and adolescence, I consistently felt held, though, when I was out in the world. Held by a knowledge of something greater, that our lives are small and part of something more. That idea that we are not simply the sum of our parts, but more than that. I remember being struck by a puzzle. In one patch where my grandmother had flowers, she also had a statue of, I believe it was Francis of Assisi. Yeah. I didn't understand why he was there in this little area of plants, but also because he was a statue, just came to trust his peace there. As I got older and began to realize my trauma and depression, I also began seeking for more. I often say that we are meaning-seeking, meaning-making, storytelling creatures, and this is, for me, a direct expression of my own experiences. I had long been seeking and trying to make meaning of the circumstances of my life and life in general, and as I became an adult, the seeking longing grew. At high school on, I identified as an atheist and still probably would if men like Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens hadn't ruined it so much for us. Their militancy and something that seems to border on loathing, I find deeply upsetting, so much so that I don't want to be associated with it. And having gone to seminary, I now have more words to talk about my beliefs than I did before. I now identify as a non-theist, which mostly means the same things, although non-theists may also include not just those who don't believe in God, but also those who are essentially indifferent to the matter. It's telling that the term non-theist has gained much more traction since Dawkins, Hitchens, and others have become so vocal. While some of their ideas have merit, to me, they are really no different in ideology than the conservative and evangelical Christians they so adamantly oppose. In its completeness, I say I am a non-theistic religious naturalist, humanist, and universalist, informed by process theology and collective liberation. That means that I feel connected to the world through the world. I try to live a good life and be a good example. I am nurtured in my relationships with other people. I believe that anything that happens to one of us happens to all of us, and that each day, each moment, we have the choice and opportunity to make something different. Unlike others, I have not been exposed to religious trauma or abuse or much of the hypocrisy of church people. And having trained in part in languages and translation long before religion and church became my life, I have a passion for playing with words and using them in a way that expresses what I mean. When you learn a foreign language, it's common to learn word equivalencies. For example, the equivalents of house in French and Russian are maison and dom, respectively. What these equivalencies don't tell you, without cultural understanding, or more specifically, the lived experiences of the people who live in these places, is that while it is common in the US to say that you live in a house, it is uncommon in France or Russia to say that you live in a house. In the case of each of those countries, to say that you live in a house often implies living in a rural setting with very specific geographic, cultural, class, and other content. You do not live in cities if you live in a house. The word equivalencies are not the same as the cultural context. And further, here in the US, house can mean so many things. From a tiny home to a mansion, those and many other structures can all be referred to as a house. We may have some basic understanding of a 3-bedroom, 2.5 bath, 2-story house like the ones that I grew up in with a yard and a fence, or we may think of something completely different. The architectural style may vary by home. While we didn't live in one, brick homes are common where I'm from. And there's a style to many of the houses on many of the streets where I grew up that will never not feel like home to me. And so although I am a non-theist, I have ease in claiming what is traditionally thought of as religious language, because the words I use mean something to me. While their basic concept may be represented in my thoughts as they are in others, there may also be a gap in the context of the understanding. I won't have my right to use these words be taken from me. I use words like faith when talking about both individual and collective beliefs and practices. I often refer to Unitarian Universalism as a faith or a faith movement because it seems to fit our theology. But I do at times also refer to it as a religion if the setting merits it, because we are also that. When people ask me what I believe, I tell them that we have come out of the Christian traditions, but are no longer bound by them, and we are a covenantal faith. Like the differences between an American house and a French or a Russian one, we don't believe the way many other religions do. When he was president of the UUA, the Reverend Bill Sinkford expressed concern about how UUs have had much resistance to religious language. He advocated for us to reimagine and claim what he called a language of reverence. The Reverend Dr. Kendall Gibbons wrote in part in a 2006 piece in UU World titled Human Reverence, the language of reverence is the language of humanity, the following. As a young Unitarian Universalist in the 1960s, I was educated about human sexuality in a relatively open fashion. Human religious experience, in contrast, was a closed book. I discovered my spirituality in much the same way that my peers raised in more conservative faiths discovered their sexuality, accidentally, furtively, without guidance, moved by overwhelming inner tides, and with some sense of shame. I secretly memorized Louisa May Alcott's My Kingdom prayer, written when she was 13, and sang myself to sleep with For the Beauty of the Earth. To my parents and teachers, almost all of whom had grown up in other religious traditions, the absence of texts, rote prayers, sacraments, holy objects, and moralistic picture books represented freedom. But without any language for my emerging sense of mystery and wonder, I came to feel the contrary, deprived of the tools with which to understand or express those experiences. Many of us have abandoned what we think of as traditional religious language for the reason Reverend Dr. Gibbons states, it represents freedom or religious thought that we want to distance ourselves from. So many people now proudly claim that they are spiritual but not religious, including Unitarian Universalists. This always makes me chuckle internally because if you are a Unitarian Universalist and you come to church or participate in congregational life, you are indeed a religious person. In order to practice Unitarian Universalism, perhaps even more so than other religions, you must be religious because there is no practice of our faith without each other. Covenants require more than one person to be made, and so practice of a covenantal faith means you are with people. And what you practice with people gives you the foundation for a religion. Worship historically is from the same root as worth. Worship that then means not some abstract form of appeasement, but an expression of respect and value. To worship is to set apart, to honor its worth. Religions encourage people to worship what they value. My own insistence on claiming religious language comes from my training in languages and translation, as well as semiotics, the study of signs and symbols and their use or interpretation. It's something that we practice all the time without being aware of it or the study of it, like how we know that when we see an octagonal red sign near an intersection, even if it didn't say stop in capital white letters, we would likely stop because that is what the sign implies. So the word God itself, similarly, doesn't mean any one particular thing, just as religion or faith or worship don't mean a particular thing. Their meanings vary across the different belief systems that hold them. It will mean something different for Muslims or Jews than it will for Christians or pagans, or the non-theists and the humanists among us. A perennial question is whether Buddhism or Taoism are considered religions when they don't fit the traditional European definitions of religion. But the words do point to some meaning for us, something often just beyond our ability to express fully in words. From robbing us of a rich vocabulary that can help us express our meaning-seeking, meaning-making stories, not using religious language has another major consequence. We are harmed directly and indirectly by the way the use of such words have been almost exclusively claimed by conservative and evangelical Christians, or perhaps haven't been exclusively claimed, but their voices are so loud that we may think of it that way. Our shared faith requires no statements of faith or belief from any of us. We are pluralistic in that we are people from a variety of faith and belief backgrounds, and we are all welcome among us, so long as we all covenant together on our journeys to co-create and participate in community making in our congregations. Our reluctance or unwillingness to use more traditionally religious language has real consequences. It gives more conservative and evangelical, that is loud, voices control over what the use of the words mean. You don't believe in a brimstone hellfire wielding God? Well, speak up about it, because that's the only God that some people imagine, and a number of them sit in our legislatures and on our judiciary benches. We can't say, I believe in a God who loves each and every one of us whole as we are, not in spite of, but because of the ways our humanity is expressed by color and race, gender, sexuality, ability, and other factors, because that is how we can know God, by celebrating what it means to be any and all things. When we cannot say that, we have given up the control to lift words and change their meanings by refusing to take part in the conversation. We also prevent our visibility in public life. I have some colleagues in Georgia and Texas who have shared their practice of wearing clerical collars when they're in public, with a pride flag pin or Black Lives Matter pin, or both. They get approached by people of all ages, asking questions, giving thanks to see clergy who support the same things they do, openly and unapologetically. It gives them strength and hope. I have myself, with the passage through the Florida legislature now of the so-called Don't Say Gay bill, decided it's time for me to also take up this practice. Last spring, I bought myself this pride flag tab for my collar, and I wear it when I'm running errands. I want the world to know where justice lies, and that at least some of us embrace the inherent worth and dignity of all, and this is a way that I am able to do so. And I do it because of my theology, my faith grounded in relationship. Relationship is the core of everything I do: the justice work, the pastoral and spiritual care, the board development, and everything else. My faith is grounded in the belief that everything is interconnected, woven together by care and interdependence in every way, and the trust, faith, that it is always possible that we will do the next right thing, and the possibility that our next choice will be the next better thing. One of the reasons I volunteer with a cat rescue farm and sanctuary is because, although I do believe in people, sometimes some of us, including myself, grate on my own nerves. And when that happens, I turn to the rescue, and I come back to the people, both as a source of hope and a source of possibility. I take walks and cross stitch a lot, and do things that feed me, to give me the strength to keep moving forward. Sometimes that's resting, sometimes that's Netflix. Often it's also playing with my cats. Faith requires tending and nurturing in order to continue feeding and sustaining us. Whatever your choices in renewing your faith, your heart, your spirit, may you be heartened in this moment by these words from retired Bishop Stephen Charleston, Episcopal priest and elder of the Choctaw Nation. You are here for a reason that is defined not only by the work you do, but by the life you lead. You are a connecting point to the sacred, a living channel through which streams of grace flow out into the world, into that reality of the people you meet, into the world you help to create simply by your presence. You are a signal, a messenger who lives the message, who embodies the meaning of the holy in every choice you make. You are a healer, a source of nurture and wholeness, here for a reason that restores the bridge of hope. If you would please rise in body or in spirit to sing when the Spirit says do.